Welcome everyone. In the last season, we saw that the professor was almost caught. Furthermore, the heist remained incomplete, leaving you with plenty of questions about the ending. Don't worry, by the end of this, you'll have all the answers you need. So, without further delay, let's dive into it. Today, we'll explore Money Heist Season 2, Episodes 1. The second season begins exactly where we left off. Inspector Raquel and her team discover the professor's training ground and quickly head there. This was the very place where the professor spent countless days training his gang and explaining every detail of the heist. For the police, this was a goldmine of evidence, a jackpot to be precise. But hold on, the professor isn't someone to be outsmarted so easily. In fact, he intentionally allowed the police to find this location. The evidence they found there was deliberately planted and only connected to individuals the police already knew about, like Tokyo, Rio, and Berlin. Despite the abundance of evidence, none of it could be used against the professor or his plan. This brilliant move was designed to delay the police by a few more days, giving the gang inside the mint enough time to print even more money. The sheer genius of the professor was evident throughout Season 1, and now it's even more apparent. Inspector Raquel, however, was overjoyed with the evidence, convinced that she was closing in on the professor. But little did she know, the professor was sitting right under her nose, pretending to be her romantic interest. On top of that, the professor had bugged Raquel, allowing him to listen to her every word from his car. Raquel then orders Inspector Suarez to bring in her ex-husband, Alberto, who happens to be their department's top forensic expert. Despite her deep issues with Alberto, Raquel knew she needed him for this case. Meanwhile, after spending a long time in the car, the professor decides it's time to head back to his base. He hadn't been in touch with the gang inside the mint for a while, and he was growing concerned. However, there wasn't a bus to Madrid for another half an hour, so Raquel offers him a ride, forcing the professor to stay with her a bit longer. Inside the mint, following the professor's strict rules, the gang called him every 6 hours. After 18 hours and 3 unanswered calls, they began to worry. The gang started to believe the professor might have been captured by the police. Berlin, however, reassures them, saying they still have one more call left. He advises everyone to stay calm, focus on the task, and continue printing money while he manages the situation. Time to take a break. Even in this tense situation, Berlin's calm and composed demeanor enrages the rest of the gang. Everyone questions him about Ariana, a hostage whom Berlin has practically turned into his servant. This angers Tokyo and Nairobi, who confront Berlin, making it clear that they cannot tolerate such behavior toward the hostages. However, this conversation doesn't sit well with Denver, as he had secretly started spending romantic moments with Monica, another hostage. It seemed that even amidst the heist, romance was unavoidable. Hearing this, Nairobi sarcastically remarks that if a hostage is attracted to you, it's a sign of Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where victims start developing feelings for their captors. This comment leaves Denver somewhat shaken. Berlin then states that if the professor doesn't answer the next call, they will activate Plan Chernobyl. The others are surprised and ask why the professor never mentioned such a plan before. Berlin replies confidently that if the situation calls for it, they will understand its necessity. Otherwise, there's no need for the plan at all. Saying this, Berlin walks away toward Ariana. After Berlin leaves, the rest of the gang grows anxious. Meanwhile, at the professor's house, Raquel's ex-husband Alberto arrives and begins examining the evidence with his team. After a thorough investigation, Alberto informs Raquel that none of the evidence found at the training ground is useful. He concludes that someone as intelligent as the professor wouldn't leave behind such incriminating evidence. It's absurd to even think so. However, he points out the chimney in the room, suggesting it might contain evidence. The professor and his gang likely burnt critical documents related to the heist there. Using forensic science, it might be possible to decipher the text on the partially burnt paper. Alberto further reveals that Raquel's colleague Angel was very close to catching the professor. He had found fingerprints matching those of the man who disguised himself as a police officer and issued threats, a callback to Season 1, when the professor had manipulated a Russian man to ensure his face wasn't revealed. Realizing that time is running out, the professor enters the house, intending to bid farewell to Raquel. However, When he overhears Alberto discussing the ashes found in the chimney as potential evidence, he panics. This is because those ashes contain burned photographs of the gang's training sessions, personal pictures of the professor himself, and even the newspaper article about his father's fatal bank robbery. If any of this evidence were to fall into the police's hands, it would be game over for the professor. Meanwhile, inside the Royal Mint, when Tokyo went to check the TV, she was shocked to see the professor appearing on screen with the police. Witnessing this, the gang immediately assumed that the professor had been arrested. This realization threw them into complete disarray. Meanwhile, Denver, still reflecting on what Nairobi had said about Stockholm Syndrome, began to worry that Monica's feelings for him might simply be a result of the condition. In an attempt to distance himself from her, Denver started behaving rudely, causing strain in their relationship. It became evident that cracks were beginning to form in the gang's morale. On the other hand, Tokyo and Rio took one of the TVs from the hostages and placed it in front of everyone, including Berlin. They showed him the footage of the professor with the police, demanding that he activate Plan Chernobyl immediately. Despite the alarming situation, Berlin remained surprisingly calm. He explained that activating Plan Chernobyl would mean throwing away all the money they had worked so hard to print. Berlin expressed confidence that the professor would soon return to his base and call them. He urged everyone to stay focused on the task at hand instead of panicking. However, Tokyo wasn't convinced and continued to push for the plan's activation. Frustrated by the tension, Berlin proposed a vote. Everyone was asked to vote on whether to wait for the professor or proceed without him. The gang was split. 3 voted to trust the professor, while the remaining 3 voted against him. At the end, Nair Abhi remains. All decisions depend on his vote. Nairob votes to trust the professor, and he said in the end he trusts the professor. That is, 4/3 vote, Berlin wins and tells everyone to get back to work. On the other hand, when the professor, he was very worried about Albert. Then he saved this plan by a trick. He went in front of her and said, "I have to catch the bus to Madrid now because it's too late." Just at that time, Alberto, the ashes from the professor's mark by yourself. For lab purposes, Ranali was, after hearing the professor's speech, he wants to write to him, and the professor then accepted the offer because that's what Masterman Professor wanted. On the other hand, after voting within the kingdom, Berlin, going to chill again, Toki can no longer spare his patience. This from Berlin with Ree and Jennifer entered the room and took him hostage. And suddenly, in this case, Berlin can do nothing about it. So what will Tokyo do with Berlin this time? Will he take command of the Hister into his own hands?